Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be continuing our coverage of the 2014 Grand Prix, Leg 1 of the Grand Prix. We're in round 7 today. White's going to be played by Nakamura, rating of 2764, and Sergey Karjakin, rating of 2767. He's going to be playing the black pieces. So these guys pretty much have the identical rating. They are the 8th and 9th ranked players in the world, so definitely going to be a very, very interesting match between them two, and both players fighting for their chance to possibly be in the top 3 out of this tournament. That definitely give them a lot of points and a lot of confidence going into the next round of the Grand Prix. Both of them at this stage are kind of in the middle of the pack. You have Caruana, and then you have Boris that are kind of at the top of this, so definitely looking to make up some ground on some of the other players in the tournament. So we go ahead and get started. Pawn here to d4, knight here to f6, knight to c3, and then bishop to g5. And this is the Veresov opening. Typically with pawn to d4, the queen pawn opening, it's a closed game. It's somewhat boring, to be honest, to the spectators because there's not much going on. The Veresov opening is a way to counter that. That is, this is going to be an aggressive opening typically because you play an early knight here to c3 and your bishop out. White's going to be castling on the queen side. Black, on the other hand, is going to be looking to attack on the queen side, castle on the king side. White's going to be looking to attack on the king side, so it's usually just people just throwing the kitchen sink at each other. Much more exciting than a typical queen pawn opening, so I thought it'd definitely be a great match to go over for you guys. Black continues with knight here to d7. We see queen to d3, getting ready to castle on the queen side as we talked about. Pawn to c5, so black already recognizing what's going to happen. Starts to push forward on the queen side, castling on the queen side as we talked about. Pawn here to c4. A few different options as far as where the queen can go. It really needs to stay pretty active. Again, both sides are looking to stay pretty aggressive. So queen here to g3. Queen to f3 possibly makes sense, but I do like queen here to g3. It does allow this queen to control this long diagonal. It does help protect this bishop here on g5, and also allows for the knight to still develop to his normal square here on f3. We do see the queen to a5, so again, both sides already, in just a few moves into the game, we're on move 6 here. Both sides already have their queen involved, so not your typical queen pawn opening game, which is why I kind of like it. Pawn here to e4, opening up the door for this bishop to get involved into the game, trying to control the center of the board. If one of these sides can really dominate the center of the board, it's going to be very, very hard for the other side to counter that, because one of these sides is going to be very, very weak. The king side is going to be very weak for black, and the queen side is going to be weak for white. If one side is dominating in the center, it's going to be a little easier for them to kind of take control of that weakness for their opponent. Pawn here to b5, so black is continuously throwing everything at his opponent on the queen side right here. We have the king coming over here to b1. Another option is just to go ahead and start to exchange off some material. We have knight taking right here, and then maybe king to b1. Maybe that's fine right here. Nakamura decides to go ahead and play king to b1, recognizing that pawn here to b4 is going to force his knight away, and he wants to make sure that he is protecting this pawn here on a2 for this queen. Can't just come down here, take on a2, and then go ahead and attack this scheme. We do see the pawn take here on e4. It's a pretty interesting move because this can go many different ways. Sergey could have decided to go ahead and capture with his knight right here. The knight could recapture, pawn takes. We could see knight here to e2. This is definitely one way the game could have gone. And so it's these small little things in the particular game, because now we see the pawn take, now the bishop recaptures and the pawn recaptures here in f6. And there's a lot of different ways that Sergey could have recaptured, but this is a much different setup than just what we looked at a few moves ago. So it's really interesting to see. A lot of preparation goes into these different matches, so it's definitely interesting to know if these players have maybe studied this many times coming into this tournament, and they've been waiting for maybe this specific setup on board. The good news for black, he does now have a bishop pair, and it's a pretty open board state, so he's going to be looking to make sure that he holds that advantage. For white's point of view, he's looking to get both his bishop here and his knight here involved into the game. He's pretty well covered on the queen side as far as his king protection. It's going to be difficult right away for black to really attack that. Black right now is going to have a tough time to castle. He potentially could castle on the king side, but he's definitely going to have to make sure that he has some protection from his king, or Nakamura can just run him over with this semi-open G-file right here. So both sides definitely have some strong attacks, but have to be wary of what their opponent's going to do. We see knight taking here on e4, so white has a little bit better control of the center of the board. Bishop here to b7, black starting to activate his double bishop pair. Knight to c5. Black recapturing that, pawn taking back here on c5. This is good and bad. White definitely, I think, has a better position on board, but now all of a sudden white has a weakness with this pawn here on c5. He doesn't have his dark square bishop, so it's going to be tough to really maintain pressure or control of this with a dark square bishop. Also, he doesn't have a knight that's really involved into the game, so it's going to be hard to protect this. So black can really start to put a lot of his pressure on this pawn, and all of a sudden if he can just get up one pawn of material, he can go ahead and trade down on material, get to the end game, and have a fairly easy end game. Right now I do like Nakamura's chances. He just has the stronger board state, but he is very, very vulnerable with this pawn. Sergey decides to go ahead and start putting pressure with rook here to c8, attacking this pawn. Nakamura now wants to go ahead and get his minor pieces involved into the game. He plays bishop here to e2. Now Sergey could go ahead and take with his rook here on c5. I think that would be fine in the game. He still has to worry about bishop here to f3. He can't take it with his own bishop because queen here to b8 is going to be very, very deadly. Again, this rook here on d1 controlling this long open d file is going to be very, very difficult for black to deal with. So he decided in the particular game, although he could take with his rook and it probably wouldn't be that bad, he wanted to go ahead and build up more attacking against this pawn. So we now see the queen come to c7, which is fine. Nakamura could decide to go ahead and exchange if he wants to. Instead, he decides to play queen over here to h3, which is fine. Bishop here to g7, fianchettoing, but also allowing, if he wants to go ahead and castle on the king side. Bishop here to f3. Again, a little bit more aggressive, also attacking this bishop. Doesn't want this bishop to pretty much control this long diagonal right here. And then after the exchange, we have knight taking here on f3. And I love this setup from Nakamura. I really like how he's prepping this. Black no longer has the double bishop pair. He's exchanged off the board. He now has the knight taking here on f3, so this is a much better square. All Nakamura has to do is make sure that he doesn't give up this material right here on c5, and he's going to pretty much go on to have a pretty solid in-game. Again, it's not going to be easy, but he's definitely going to have a pretty solid in-game, especially with his opponent over here. He has double pawns on the f-file. He has a few things that he can exploit. Black now plays pawn here to e6, and then a pretty interesting move from Nakamura. He plays rook over here to e1, and I say this because I don't think he recognizes what he could have done to try to hold on to protect this pawn here on c5. One option he had is to play knight to d4. This looks pretty good. If the queen came over here to take on c4, then we could see a capture. Pawn can't really capture. That's kind of bad. You just have the queen take here on e6, and then the queen pretty much has to do something he doesn't like. All of a sudden the rook falls. That's going to be definitely bad. If we come back here and he doesn't take, could always take here on b5. We could see the pawn come here to e5 and try to force this knight to move, but then all of a sudden this is going to be very, very bad. Knight to f5, attacking this bishop, but all of a sudden this queen is kind of blocked off from protecting the king side. That's not going to be good. This queen can get involved into the game, really attack this king side over here from black. So that's not going to be good. All in all, I think knight to d4 was probably the move he wanted to find. Rook over here to e1. Yeah, it controls the semi file right here on the e file, but I think there's more pressing needs, and that was this pawn right here. Black decides to go ahead and castle on the king side, so he's got some protection. Rook up here to d4. So Nakamura goes for plan B, and his plan B is go ahead and throw the entire kitchen sink at the king side of black. Now the queen's going to come down, take this material, so all of a sudden black is now up in material. We do see the rook swing over here to a g4. So, you know, Karjakin, all he needs to do is defend correctly, and he's going to be completely fine. But he does have some weaknesses. All of a sudden, you can see the semi-open file for, you know, on the G file. If he does make a mistake, Nakamura not only is going to be back in the game, but he's probably going to have a pretty easy win. So we see the rook come over here to D8, giving a little bit of breathing room for this king if he needs to, and also controls this long file right here. If for any reason this rook were to swing up, then this rook could just swing down here to d1, and it would be a back rank mate. So that's something Nakamura has to be thinking about the rest of the game. So it does kind of hinder this rook here on e1. We now see queen to h6, you know, pretty common move that you see. I don't know that it's going to work too much against such a high-level player, but it is going to actually net back a pawn. So queen to f6, and Nakamura has managed to get back in the game and equal the material. So really, really good for him. Now, curious to see how this ends up. Now the king's going to come to h8, trying to defend. Rook to d5. Centralizing the rook right here, knight to g5, trying to get as many pieces as he can, although it's not clear how he's going to clearly attack his opponent, and then rook over here to f5. And this is a great move from black because it really shuts down a lot of the attack that white has. There's nowhere for white to really go here, although this semi-open g file is here. The black king in the corner is pretty safe, and now white has to worry about a lot of threats. This rook here on f5 is attacking the queen. We have the bishop eyeing down on this long diagonal. We have the queen eyeing down this long diagonal. This rook here on c8 can start to get involved into the game. So Nakamura's definitely got to be careful as we move towards the later stage of the middle game to make sure he doesn't lose this. We now see the queen come back here to e3. I think maybe it's a little bit better if the queen comes back here to g3. It still protects some of the same material, but it also allows for more control of the semi-open g file. If Nakamura is going to get back into the game, it's going to be defending correctly and then still attacking on this semi-open file right here. But in the game, he decided to play queen here to e3, and then we have rook over here to d8. Similar as before, this rook is really keeping white at bay, and this rook over here on f5 is a lot more aggressive. We now see this rook swing over here to h4, again, trying to do something. This does, you know, possibly allow this rook to come up here to h7, but now the king can just come here to g8. That's going to be completely fine. And so the rook's going to swing up here to g4, just kind of maneuvering, making sure that each side is not going to make a huge mistake. But after rook here to g4, this really opens up the door for pawn to h5. And this is really tough for Nakamura to deal with. Now all of a sudden he has to move his rook where he doesn't necessarily want it to. You know, he lines up all his minor and major pieces on the e file, and this actually is the correct setup that you want. You want to have your rook, queen, and your rook behind. Really allows for a strong attack, but not against your opponent's pawn that's protected by a pawn. That's not what you usually want to eye down. You usually want to eye down one of your opponent's minor pieces, one of their major pieces, or just a strong attack against your opponent's king. Then all of a sudden we see queen here to b4, so threatening mate right here. Now Nakamura, obviously a great player, not going to allow that, so plays pawn here to c3. And then possibly the best move so far in the tournament. I think I've covered maybe 60% of the matches, gone through each of them just to see how they went, see if anything caught me off guard, any interesting openings or anything. But I think the next move from Sergey is so far the best move in the tournament. So if you want to take a minute, pause, see if you can find that move. But we'll go ahead and continue. The move that he played was actually bishop takes on c3. Very, very nice deflection in the game after the queen takes, and there is an exchange. Then this rook's going to take here on g5. So all of a sudden, Sergey is able to exchange, go to the endgame, a double rook endgame, but now he is up in material. So that's definitely where you want to be. A lot of grandmasters are going to find this very, very easy, and Sergey is definitely one of the premier in-game players. So, you know, very, very nice find for him, because now he has somewhat of an easy game approaching the end game. So we see pawn here to g3, king to g7. Both sides are going to be looking to centralize their kings. King to c2, a rook down here to d3. Nice little outpost. It's going to be very, very difficult for white to do too much as far as getting his king involved. And then all of a sudden, black can start to get his own king involved, because white doesn't really have any great outposts to go to. So both sides just kind of maneuvering their pawns a little bit. All of a sudden, black is completely okay with exchanging some material off the board. The sooner he can get to all the material off the board, he's going to have a pawn. It's going to be a little easier in game for him. But for right now, he's just going to move his pieces every now and then, see if he can find some material, and then he plays a much better in-game than Nakamura. I'm not sure if Nakamura was a little bit tired, if he's just not familiar with the rook in-game as much as Karjakin, but definitely a few small errors that the computer was finding as they were playing. Now, I'm not really sure it would have mattered a ton, but there were a few small things that it looked like Nakamura could have done to make the end game a little bit better for himself. Black does start to gobble up some material from whites, and then all of a sudden we see pawn here to b4. And this was kind of the last dagger in the coffin. This was really, really tough for Nakamura to come back from. After the pawn recaptures, rook over here to b3, and the king moves. After this pawn comes off the board, then it's just a matter of basic tactical moves from black. The king's going to come up here, and pretty much this rook is now going to protect this pawn. This pawn can start pushing up the board. This rook is forced to come to c1, and he's going to be just on this first rank the most of the game, the rest of the game here. So pawn here to h4, pushing down on the board. Even though this pawn comes up to close to the 8th rank, all of a sudden this rook can come up here to c8, and he can pretty much control this entire thing. And then there's just too much pressure from black on board. And then all of a sudden we see Nakamura decides to go ahead and resign. So really, really great game. Always like to see in a big tournament like this, players at such high level playing a very aggressive opening with lots of tactical lines that they probably don't play as much. I can't believe that the Verisov opening is something that they play nearly as much as some of the other queen pawn openings. So really, really cool. Again, both these players, they're pretty equally matched as far as rating. So with this win, Sergey Karjakin goes up to 3rd in the tournament so far. He's half a point behind, again, Boris and Caruana. I think it's going to be tough to catch them, but we do still have a lot of chess to play. Nakamura, he's a little bit further back, but he's still playing well. He's got some nice games under the belt so far, so if he can rattle off some wins, you may see him near the top as well, and we'll be covering those. Make sure you check out some more coverage on thechesswebsite.com. We have a section dedicated to this if you want to see all the different games that are played, and there's some additional analysis going on. But hopefully you guys are enjoying this, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.